This is the morning of the 23rd of November. I posted a clip about this incident, Kentucky plane crashes in Florida. NTSB revealed why November 121 GJ fell from the sky in 18 seconds. Preliminary updates put up by Flig Debrief. Before I get into this clip, it was placed for about 16 minutes. I just want to give you guys some insight. I watched this video, and as most of you know, I'm a licensed private pilot, both high performance and acrobatic certified. When you fly into an uncontrolled airport, you have to pick up their frequency. Each airport has its own radio frequency. And the reason you have to pick it up is because they have what's called ATIS, Airport Terminal Information System. And it tells you the direction that the planes are landing. It tells you which runway they're landing on. It gives you the barometric pressure which you need to set your altimeter. And it also provides the winds that you're going to have to expect to deal with. Now, you have to tune in to that frequency before you enter that airspace. And other airplanes in that vicinity are on that same frequency, so they can hear you. So in other words, they know where you are, which is important because it's an uncontrolled airport and the pilots have to sort of obey certain rules to stagger themselves to get into position to land. It's important that you understand that before I get into this video. Personally, I believe this pilot was dead just prior to the crash. Now, they're not going to probably be able to determine that because I don't know if there's anything left other than the tail of the airplane. The whole thing just disintegrated pretty much on impact. But what they do know is the landing gear was not down and the flaps were not down. In other words, the plane wasn't in the landing configuration, which is why I think the pilot either was unconscious or he died. They have to look into his medical records to see if he took the shot and when he had his last physical. To maintain proficiency as a pilot, you have to have a physical. Over 40, you have to have it. I think it's, before it was once in, I think, 5 years, then it was every 2 years. And I think that's what it is. Over 40, you have to have it every 2 years. And the guy flying this high performance Baron, high performance is pressurized, and the plane's fast. Anyway, now that you understand a little bit more, let's get into this video. Plays for 15 and a half minutes.
Fire and silence. This is the case of November 121 Golf Juliet, and the NTSB prelim report is just out. Let's take a look to see what it reveals, what might explain this 18-second loss of control that turned a routine flight into tragedy.
The flight in the airplane.
According to the NTSB preliminary report, the airplane was a Beechcraft 58P Baron registration, November 1, 21, Golf Juliet. On the afternoon of October 5th, 2025, the pilot...
Prostate exams are up.
Okay, they threw the ad in on us. I'll get rid of it.
Lebanon Springfield Airport in central Kentucky at about 1:18 p.m. Local time, bound for Williston Regional Airport in Florida. It was a personal flight conducted under Part 91, meaning no company schedule, no passengers for hire, just a private pilot and two friends heading home after a hunting trip. The flight climbed smoothly to 17,000 feet, MSL cruising under visual flight rules, while receiving radar advisories from air traffic control. Everything about the en route portion appeared normal. Now a few words about the airplane itself. The Beechcraft 58P Baron is the pressurized, turbocharged version of the well-known Baron line, effectively a twin-engine touring aircraft built for speed and comfort. Each of its Continental TSIO 520WB engines produces about 325 horsepower, giving the airplane a maximum cruise speed near 260 knots and a ceiling up to 25,000 feet. In simple terms, this is not a basic trainer. It's a high-performance machine, a kind of mini business jet that rewards precision but punishes mistakes. At typical cruise speeds between 180 and 220 knots, the Baron carries enormous kinetic energy, meaning even small control inputs can have big consequences. That energy must be managed carefully when descending into lower, busier airspace, especially near non-towered airports where the pilot alone must handle speed configuration and situational awareness. On paper, this was exactly the right airplane for a long cross-country trip, but with that capability comes workload, and at low altitude, that workload can rise fast. As the Baron neared its destination about 50 miles northwest of Williston, the NTSB report notes the airplane began a normal descent from cruise. Weather at the time was visual meteorological conditions, light winds 10 miles of visibility, and scattered clouds around 2,400 feet. In other words, an ideal day to fly. Williston Regional Airport, or X-60, is a quiet, non-towered general aviation field. There's no controller giving clearances. Pilots announce their own positions and sequence themselves using a common traffic advisory frequency. The airport has two main runways, runway 523, a concrete strip more than 600 feet long, and runway 1432, a shorter asphalt runway about 5,000 feet. Both use standard left-hand traffic patterns. 10 miles from the airport, the Baron was already level at roughly 1,300 feet MSL, flying about 180 knots ground speed. That's unusually fast and low this close to the field. A typical pattern entry for a Baron would be closer to 110 to 130 knots, with the landing gear and flaps starting to come down by 1,000 feet AGL. At that point, ATC terminated radar service and instructed the pilot to switch to the local frequency standard procedure, but it means no controller was now watching altitude or speed. From here on, it was entirely up to the pilot to manage spacing and energy. Roughly 4 miles northwest of the runway radar shows the Baron making a right turn and actually accelerating from about 158 to 168 knots. That tells us the airplane was still clean, no flaps, no gear, still carrying cruise level energy. If you visualize this on a map, imagine a small twin skimming low over farmland, moving far faster than most traffic in a pattern descending toward the airport, still in cruise mode. That high-energy arrival may not have left much margin for correction.
That's one of the reasons I think that he was either dead or unconscious, right? You don't enter one of those uncontrolled airports dirty. In other words, without the gear down and without flaps engaged. You just don't do that. That's why I think he was, once again, either dead or unconscious. The last 18 seconds.
From here, the NTSB timeline compresses rapidly. A witness, another pilot flying about a mile west of the Baron, later told investigators he saw the airplane in a steep bank, about 90 degrees, rolling and descending fast. Radar data shows the descent rate suddenly increasing to around 4,000 feet per minute. The airplane's track turned toward a 200-degree heading, which doesn't line up with the 45-degree orientation of runway 5. That's a sign the airplane was no longer flying a controlled approach. It was in an unplanned descending turn. No radio call was made. No mayday, no sign of troubleshooting.
Again, another reason why I think he was either dead or unconscious, and his son or his son's friend didn't know how to use the radios, which I think is a big mistake. I taught my son how to fly when he was 14.
Within those final 18 seconds, the airplane plunged from roughly pattern altitude to the ground. The Barron's
Just so you know, pattern altitude is usually 1,000 feet over the surface of the runway. That's usually what they are, 1,000 feet. Let's go back.
struck a peanut field about 1.7 nautical miles northwest of the runway threshold, scattering debris for more than 700 feet and igniting a severe post-impact fire. On a clear day like that, the runway would have been visible from the crash site an agonizingly short distance from safety. This kind of accident fits a pattern known as loss of control in flight, or LOCI, still one of the leading causes of fatal general aviation crashes. In simple terms, it's what happens when an airplane departs controlled flight, often due to disorientation, distraction, or excessive bank angle, and the pilot can't recover before impact. A spiral dive, for example, begins innocently, the bank angle increases, the nose drops, and the airplane starts tightening its turn. Speed builds rapidly, G-forces rise, and recovery becomes physically impossible, especially starting from only 1/300 feet above the ground. From the first sign of that steep roll, the pilot likely had less than 20 seconds to recognize the motion, correct the attitude, and regain control.
That's assuming he was coherent and awake, which I don't believe he was.
In a high-performance twin like the Baron, that's an incredibly small window, and once it's gone, recovery simply isn't possible.
Clues in the wreckage.
When investigators arrived at the scene, what they found told a clear story about energy and impact. The airplane had struck a peanut field on a heading of roughly 200 degrees, its debris path stretching more than 765 feet across the terrain. The first pieces they found were parts of the right wingtip, suggesting that was the initial point of contact. The long straight debris trail that followed fragments of fuselage engines and
I have a question for you.
Ad popped up.
blades pointed to a high-speed forward-moving impact consistent with a steep powered descent. The fuselage was largely destroyed by the post-impact fire. Only the empennage or tail section remained relatively intact. Importantly, all major components were found within the debris field, a sign there was no in-flight breakup or mid-air collision before impact.
And I think the bodies were incinerated, so there's no way they're going to be able to determine what kind of condition the pilot was in. But nothing else explains that kind of accident.
Then there's the airplane's configuration. Both the landing gear and flaps were found retracted. For non-pilots, that means the airplane wasn't set up for landing. When a pilot is preparing to land, the gear is lowered and flaps are deployed to add drag and stability. Here, the airplane was still clean aerodynamic and fast, right up to the moment it hit the ground.
Flaps are also lowered to provide additional lift because you're slowing the aircraft down. So when you change the configuration of the wing, you're going to increase lift.
Investigators also recovered both engines, which had separated from the wings on impact. The propeller blades from each were torn free from their hubs and scattered throughout the field. The metal showed bending, twisting, and gouging, typical signs that the propellers were spinning and producing power when they hit. That tells us something critical. This wasn't a power-off glide. Both engines were likely running normally. Whatever caused the crash wasn't a total engine failure, it was loss of control. The NTSB also noted that the airplane carried several modern avionics units capable of recording flight and engine data. Those devices, similar to digital loggers in advanced GPS systems, were sent to the NTSB Vehicle Recorder Laboratory for extraction. If those recordings survived, they could reveal invaluable details, ground speed changes, heading shifts, maybe even control positions or autopilot activity in the final moments. From configuration impact marks and debris spread, investigators could already conclude this. The Baron struck the ground at high speed with power on in a steep bank, not while lined up to land, but while out of control.
What might have gone wrong? I told you what went wrong.
Now, it's still early in the investigation, but based on what the preliminary report and known data show, several factors stand out. Let's go through them carefully. First, there's the workload. Approaching a non-towered airport, a pilot has to handle everything: descent planning, visual, scanning, speed, control radio, calls, and traffic awareness all at once. That workload rises fast in a high-performance twin, like the 58P. At 1,300 feet and 180 knots, then still above 160 knots just 4 miles out, this Baron was moving much faster than most aircraft in the pattern. It's possible the pilot was trying to catch up, maybe rushing the entry, or tightening a turn to line up for the runway. When you mix high speed, low altitude, and a sharp turn, the airplane's margin for error nearly disappears. Then there's fatigue, and what pilots call get-there-itis. After a 3-hour flight home from a relaxing weekend, the mindset subtly shifts. You're comfortable, nearly done mentally, already on the ground. That's when focus can fade just enough for a single distraction to snowball into a dangerous situation. Next, the loss of control itself. The steep bank and rapid descent match the classic pattern of a spiral dive, a tightening turn where gravity G-forces and increasing airspeed combine to overwhelm control inputs. Even in daytime, VMC spatial disorientation can still happen. The human body's balance system, your inner ear, can't always distinguish between acceleration and pitch or roll changes. If you're turning while looking down at instruments, or if the horizon is hazy, your brain can misjudge your actual attitude. All it takes is a few seconds of false sensation thinking the airplane is level when it's banking for the spiral to begin. Once the descent rate picks up and G-forces build, recovery becomes nearly impossible, especially from just 1,300 feet. Investigators will also look closely at the airplane's flight controls and autopilot system. In a twin-engine Baron, the autopilot is commonly used for most of the cruise. But when it's disengaged late in the descent, especially if the trim isn't properly adjusted, the airplane can pitch or roll unexpectedly. At 160 knots, even a small mistrim can require heavy control forces to correct. They'll examine the elevator and aileron cables, control pulleys, and the autopilot servos to rule out any mechanical restriction or jam. If something had seized or bound in the control system, it could explain a sudden uncontrollable roll or dive, though right now there's no evidence of that. Both engines appeared to be operating at impact, so a single engine failure or asymmetric thrust doesn't seem likely. Still, NTSB engineers will check the fuel system's turbochargers and engine controls to confirm. Finally, consider the environment. Williston is an uncontrolled airport. There's no air traffic controller to warn too fast, too low, or to suggest a go-around. That's entirely the pilot's decision. And in good weather, what pilots call a blue sky trap, risk perception drops. Everything looks benign, so urgency fades. But statistically clear days produce some of the deadliest accidents simply because small misjudgments aren't corrected in time. At this stage, all signs point to a loss of control in visual conditions, possibly triggered by a rushed or unstable approach. But whether it began as distraction, disorientation, or a mechanical issue, we won't know for sure until the full NTSB report is complete.
Aftermath and lessons.
The Baron came to rest in a peanut field less than 2 miles from the runway. All 3 on board were killed instantly. No one on the ground was hurt, but the impact was devastating, visible from the airport itself on what had been a calm, sunny afternoon. The NTSB will now analyze radar data wreckage and any surviving avionics logs to understand the exact sequence. It will take months before a final report is released. For the rest of us, a few key lessons already stand out. First, slow down early. Don't bring cruise speeds into the traffic pattern of a small, untowered airport. Second, commit to a stabilized approach. If you're not on speed and properly configured by 1,000 feet above the ground, go around. And finally, respect energy management. High-performance twins like the Baron reward skill, but they also punish haste. We may not yet know exactly what caused November 121 Golf Joliet's fatal descent, whether distraction, disorientation, or something mechanical, but the lesson is timeless: high performance, low altitude, and hurry, never mix. If it doesn't feel right on approach, slow down, climb away, and give yourself the seconds this crew never had.
I only had to do, I think, 2 go-arounds. One at Catalina, the winds were just really vicious, and I couldn't keep it on center line. So I went around, and I landed safely. And I'm surprised they didn't mention the possibility that the pilot was incapacitated, which is, I think, what he was, for the reasons I've already given. Let me know what you think. Pass it along, and thanks for listening.